Assalamu alaikum. So today I have something interesting, my first reaction video to a video called Even Stephen Hawking is Wrong by John Lennox. So Stephen Hawking was a physicist who passed away recently, and he was an atheist. And I personally have a lot of interesting things to say about him, but let's see what this man, John Lennox, has to say about him. Okay. So let's get into this video.
In the movie it says, the quote is made by Hawking, and I'm going to give my best memory of this. He says, because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing.
Because there's a law like gravity, universe will and can create itself out of nothing. That doesn't make sense.
His creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing. And then I think there was an addendum, you don't need God to account for the universe. This was a little bit of a retraction because maybe Hawking in the past had a little bit of an open door about that.
He did. He left the question open at the end of the mind of God, but he's come out clearly as an atheist. It's that quotation that you just made that was the motivation for me writing the book. I was shown that just before Hawking's book appeared, and asked by a national newspaper to comment on it. And I was so amazed at this. Because there is a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. And I thought, hang on a minute, that's a flat contradiction. Because there is a law of gravity, that is because there is something, the universe creates itself from nothing. I mean, that's just flat contradiction. And then I thought, but wait a minute, because there is a law of gravity. He doesn't even say because there is gravity. And it seemed to me there that he's become a victim of thinking that
the law is just a metaphor that we use.
Popular in academic circles, that laws can create things, which is nonsense, of course. Unfortunately, the financial crisis came about by that. People thought that the laws of mathematics could create money, but they can't create anything at all. More seriously, perhaps still, in that sentence, the universe will create itself. Now, if I say X creates Y, what do those words mean? Well, if I've got X, it'll produce Y. So if I say if X creates X, what does that mean? It means if I've got X, it'll produce X. And in the book I just put, and it came out in the film, I say, well, that just proves that nonsense remains nonsense, even if spoken by very clever
that
scientists.
got one of the biggest laughs of the whole day.
Yes, and what people don't realize is that here is Hawking. He's a brilliant, famous scientist. He was just ahead of me at Cambridge. I remember it very well. I've no quibble with his science, but it's what he deduces from it is the problem.
This is an interesting part, actually. So you see, what we call science actually has two parts. One you can call the empirical science, and the second is the philosophy of science. So empirical science is basically what you can experimentally verify. Okay, so no one can argue about empirical science. Okay, like mathematics is also empirical in a way, like 2 + 2 is 4. You can't argue about it. Similarly, acid plus base is equal to salt and water. Like if you mix acid with base, you will get salt and water. That's empirical science. But there are things which cannot be experimentally verified, and that is where philosophy of science comes in. That is where people use their subjective logic and rationale to make statements that cannot be experimentally verified. And that is where most people confuse atheism with science. That's not empirical science, that is philosophy with subjective opinions. Okay, let's just continue on the video.
It reminds me of something that's very important in this area, Rice, and it's this. Statements of scientists aren't always statements of science. But
that's what I just said.
The trouble is, because they've got authority, people think this is an authoritative statement of science, and that Hawking has solved the mystery of the existence of the universe. He hasn't. He's given a statement that has 3 distinct levels of contradiction built within it. That's not a very good start.
really the essence of what Hawking is saying is that nothing can produce everything, but,
Yes.
but they don't really mean nothing by that.
No, they don't mean nothing by that. And that's immensely important. Actually, I find it highly amusing what's going on, because here we have the most ironic situation in history. For centuries, scientists believed that the universe had existed forever, because that's what Aristotle had taught. The Bible, however, had been insisting for millennia,
And the Quran and the Torah and all the texts which comes from the same God.
in the beginning God created the universe. There was a beginning. Science caught up with that in the 1960s. And I remember that, because when the evidence for a beginning to space-time came in, the leading members of the British scientific establishment said, we don't go down that road. Why? It'll give too much leverage to people who believe the Bible. Now we're in the situation where the general opinion of cosmologists is space-time had a beginning. Okay, so what was there before? Nothing, absolutely nothing. In the philosophical sense, absence of anything. But you can't get a universe from nothing. So the way they now do it is to redefine nothing. I mean, Lawrence Krauss, who's an astrophysicist, says something.
Oh my goodness! You get on to him. I'm interested in anything you have to say about him. It's hilarious.
Absolutely hilarious, I'm afraid. Forgive me, but he says because something is physical, nothing must be physical, especially if you define it as the absence of something. Well, that's sheer nonsense. Now, I had the opportunity to debate with Alan Guth, who's the father of inflation theory at the Harvard
Borde, Guth, and Vilenkin,
Borde, Guth, and Vilenkin, brilliant mathematicians. And I had a very friendly public debate at the Harvard MIT Faculty Club. And I asked Alan publicly, I said, you know, there's much ado about nothing going on about there. People outside, people are really confused about nothing. Now, Alan, I said, when you talk about nothing as a cosmologist, you don't mean what most of us mean by nothing, absence of anything. No, he said, we don't. They talk about a quantum vacuum and they talk about, but that
This is going a bit in a different direction, so they have shifted from the main topic. I'll tell you what initially they were talking about. So what they said is basically scientists earlier on believed that the universe had always existed. It had no beginning. But then they found out that evidence that space-time had a beginning, and that's where the idea of Big Bang came from. So then they developed the hypothesis that there was an explosion, Big Bang, and that basically started the whole universe. So theoretically, according to the mainstream physics, before Big Bang, there was nothing. Like, there was nothing. So the question is, if there was nothing, then where did all this matter and energy come from? Where did all this space emerge from, right? Because nothing can come from nothing. So if before Big Bang there was nothing, so when Big Bang did occur, so where did all this mass and energy and space and time come from, right? And people who believe in God say, well, the answer is simple. There's a creator who created, right? There's a planner who planned. And atheists who will do anything to just avoid the argument of God becoming strong enough scientifically, so they give different reasons. And Stephen Hawking, what he said is that law of gravity created whatever there is, right? Law of gravity created something from nothing. And that's a flat contradiction, as John Lennox pointed out, because a law cannot create something. Just think about it. When something exists, law acts on it. But when there's nothing, law cannot cause it to exist, right? For example, there are cars on the road, and the law is you cannot cross a red light. So if there will be a car, the law will apply on the car, and the car will not cross the red light. But if there is no car, then the law cannot cause the car to exist, right? If something exists already, then the law applies on it. But if something doesn't exist, then the law doesn't cause its existence. Okay? So in fact, existence of matter or an entity precedes existence of a law. You see? So to say that the law of gravity created anything, or any law created anything, is just sheer nonsense. It's just insanity, right? That's what he's saying.
Nothing. And so the public...
And now they're saying, okay, so nothing comes from nothing. So now what scientists are trying to do is that they're trying to redefine what nothing means.
Is being confused. And I say it's ironic, because here are these very intelligent people writing endless books and getting something from nothing, but to do it they have to redefine nothing. They have not solved the question. Whereas, from the Christian point of view, the question is solved.
And from the Islamic point of view, it is solved.
Because there wasn't nothing, there was God, who's non-physical. God is spirit, and he caused it all to be, and he supports it in being. That makes perfect sense. The other doesn't.
Wow, this is, again, the book God and Stephen Hawking. Dr. Lennox, just thinking about this, let me try to just summarize in essence. When you're asked for evidence for God, when you're asked for the evidence for God, the beginning of the universe, you either have one or two things. The atheist says, well, it could be gravity. Hawking says it's gravity.
Yes, wherever that comes from.
So
there's no
it's an eternal law just hanging there, or there's an eternal lawgiver. So really, we're within the intellectual bounds to say it's far more reasonable to present a lawgiver than a law.
I would always prefer a theory that actually explains something than one that doesn't. And something that stands to reason.
That's common sense.
Than one that doesn't. And when it comes to the beginning, the biblical view makes perfectly intelligible sense.
And the Quran also, because Quran and the Injil, which later on got manipulated and turned into Bible, come from the same source, God, Allah.
It's certainly, at the very least, has the right to sit at the table. I think it's more. I think it's actually true. And I think that the atheist view actually is incoherent at this point.
I can't stress enough how important this video is. You ought to watch it again and again. We'll have other videos we'll be recommending, of course, the book God and Stephen Hawking, to hear the actual. You heard Josh, as an 18-year-old freshman, try to explain in a class the response to this, but you want to hear and read what Dr. Lennox says, how to specifically answer that question of why there's something rather than nothing. Obviously, we believe there's a creator. And so we hope to equip you. We hope these segments will help equip you so that you can give those answers. When that moment comes for somebody who says, what's the reason for your faith? You'll be prepared, as the scripture says, to give that reason and give that response.
And I think perhaps it's important to say, if I may add to that you don't need to have an advanced degree in physics to read this book. I'm writing the book about not the science, but the way people use it. And it's accessible to young people of all kinds, even to people that haven't studied science, because I'm trying to give them some kind of way of responding into this debate, even though they may not be qualified by having a degree from some university in that topic.
Well, I have this book in my library. You need it in yours.
That was interesting. So I already explained the main part of the video, and you know, it's like when they say, okay, nothing can come from nothing, so then they have to redefine what nothing means. It's such a political game in a way, right? It's just playing with words and meanings. This is sheer hypocrisy. And that book is interesting. I'll try to get it. And let me know what you guys think. And you know, this is really interesting, that people who believe in one God should know why they believe in one God, should have the rationale that they can present to other people. And I think Muslims have had a very rich tradition of dealing with these issues. If John Lennox, in case you're watching this, then you should read Imam al-Ghazali, you should read Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. These people are like 1,000-year-old scholars, 800 years old scholars who have written volumes regarding such issues. So, okay, I think this is enough for this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Assalamu alaikum.